Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking, well, a serious plunge into a topic that's really becoming the true engine of value in the global economy, especially for cutting-edge companies.
That's right. We're talking about intellectual property, or IP.
Exactly, IP. And we're also going to explore a crucial emerging role designed to help businesses, particularly in tech startups, navigate this complex landscape.
The chief intellectual property officer, often seen, especially in startups, in a fractional capacity.
Fractional. We'll get into what that means.
Absolutely. And just to frame how fundamental IP has become, consider this. It's a pretty striking figure from the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO.
Okay.
In 2023, their analysis estimated the value of global corporate intangible assets. So that's everything from patents, trade secrets, brands, software, proprietary data at approximately $61.9 trillion.
$61.9 trillion. Okay, hang on. Let's unpack this a bit. That's an absolutely staggering number. What does that really represent for companies today? Seriously.
It represents a fundamental shift. I mean, a really massive shift in how value is created and, well, where it's held.
Okay.
This $61.9 trillion estimate, it's roughly a tenfold increase in the value of these intangible assets just since 1996. Think about that growth curve.
10 times since 96.
Yeah. And if you look at the top U.S. firms right now, intangible assets make up something like 90% of their entire enterprise value.
90%.
90%. So for
Good.
startups operating in those really IP-intensive sectors, biotech, advanced software, AI, novel hardware, not actively identifying, capturing, and strategically managing their IP, well, it isn't just missing an opportunity.
It sounds like it's neglecting the core asset.
It's fundamentally neglecting the vast majority of their potential valuation and their long-term competitiveness. It's building on shaky ground.
So if IP has gone from like a legal footnote to maybe 90% of a company's value, especially in tech, our deep dive today is really focused on understanding this new reality for startups.
Right.
We're looking at a whole stack of sources exploring the critical importance of IP, the specific hurdles startups face, and how this chief intellectual property officer role, especially the fractional model, might just be a transformative solution.
And we'll be taking a specific look at this dynamic within India's booming startup ecosystem, too. It's a really interesting case study.
Okay, good. And the relevance here for you, the listener, seems pretty immense.
Oh, absolutely. Whether you're actually building a groundbreaking product yourself or maybe evaluating investment opportunities or honestly just trying to understand the core drivers of value and growth in this modern, knowledge-based economy.
Yeah.
Grasping strategic IP management and the role of someone like a CIPO is pretty essential. It's often the difference between having a potentially valuable idea and having a defensible, monetizable, and ultimately successful business.
So it's about unlocking potential, really, and avoiding some major pitfalls along the way.
Precisely. Avoiding those big, expensive mistakes.
All right, that sets the stage beautifully. Let's drill down into that core problem then. Why IP is so crucial today, but also why do startups seem to struggle with it so much?
Right. It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it? For decades, the focus for many companies, especially the early stage ones, was all about tangible assets, factories, equipment, inventory, things you could touch.
Physical stuff.
Exactly. Physical stuff. IP was often just shunted off to the legal department, seen as maybe a cost center for defensive measures or just necessary paperwork. But the sources we looked at, and frankly the market itself, show that paradigm is just obsolete now. That $61.9 trillion global intangible asset figure from WIPO and the 90% value for top U.S. firms, it demonstrates that innovation captured as intellectual property is now the main engine.
The primary driver.
Yeah, the primary engine of enterprise value. We're talking patents for inventions, trade secrets for processes, trademarks for brands, copyrights for creative works. For a startup whose whole reason for being is based on a novel technology or a new business method, while that intangible asset is the company, basically.
So if you fail to identify it, protect it.
You're building on sand. You really are.
And it's not just this abstract value on a balance sheet, is it?
Yeah.
You mentioned funding. There's a very direct link between having strong IP and actually getting the investment needed to scale up.
Oh, absolutely. This is where, the rubber really meets the road for startups and investors. VCs, other sophisticated investors, they're looking for defensibility. They want market differentiation, a sustainable competitive advantage.
Makes sense. They want to know their investment is protected.
Exactly. And a robust, well-thought-out IP portfolio signals precisely that. It's not just a legal asset in their eyes. It's a strategic moat. It makes the company seem less risky and, frankly, a much more attractive investment. And the sources highlight a really compelling statistic here. Getting a startup's first patent, just the first one, increases its chance of raising VC funding in the next 3 years by a remarkable 59% relative to the baseline probability.
Hold on, wait, say that again. Just one patent boosts your VC funding chances by nearly 60%.
That's what the data suggests. Now, to be precise, it's a 3.5 percentage point increase in the probability of receiving funding, but relative to the baseline, that's a 59% jump, which is substantial, especially when baseline probabilities might be quite low for early-stage companies.
Wow. Why such a big effect?
Well, the effect is strongest in those very early stages. That's when investors have less concrete information about the technology, about market traction. A granted patent acts as a kind of verified third-party signal of genuine innovation and potential market exclusivity.
So it reduces the guesswork for them.
Exactly. It reduces that information asymmetry and significantly boosts investor confidence. It's proof someone official thinks the core idea is novel.
That's a powerful incentive for founders. So IP is key for attracting investment. And I assume also for when the company wants to exit, through acquisition maybe.
Absolutely. IP is consistently cited as a primary driver in mergers and acquisitions. Acquirers are frequently paying significant premiums for companies specifically to get control of their patent portfolios or their trade secrets or their proprietary tech stack.
Right.
The sources offer some, well, they're classic examples now, but they illustrate the point dramatically. Back in 2012, Google's $12.5 billion acquisition of Motorola Mobility. That was widely understood to be primarily about getting Motorola's huge portfolio of 17,000 patents.
Ah, yes, I remember that. For the smartphone wars.
Exactly. Crucial at the time. Similarly, Apple buying Authentech for $365 million. That was explicitly about getting control of their 200-plus key patents in fingerprint sensor technology.
Which obviously became Touch ID.
Right. So for a startup aiming for an acquisition exit, a well-protected IP portfolio is often the single most valuable asset on the table. It directly impacts the purchase price, sometimes dramatically.
Okay, so given all this, IP is this incredibly powerful engine for value, for funding, for a successful exit. Why on earth do so many startups struggle to manage it effectively? It still feels kind of counterintuitive.
That really is the critical challenge, isn't it? The reality for most founders, especially in the early days, is just chaos.
Yeah.
They are completely consumed by building the product, trying to find product market fit, hiring the first crucial team members, navigating the day-to-day fires, survival mode.
Right, just keeping the lights on?
Pretty much. And IP, which can seem really complex, definitely expensive, it often just gets pushed down the priority list. It's seen as, oh, that's a future problem, or that's just a legal formality we'll get to later, rather than an immediate strategic imperative.
Okay, so they delay. What are the actual consequences of that delay or taking that kind of reactive approach?
The consequences can be severe and, frankly, sometimes irreversible. One of the most critical is simply missing deadlines. Patent laws globally have really strict filing deadlines, often tied to the first time you publicly disclose the invention or even offer it for sale. So talking about it too early can hurt you.
It absolutely can. Missing those deadlines means you might irrevocably forfeit the ability to get patent protection in key global markets. Forever.
Wow.
Valuable innovations that aren't documented and protected in time can just slip into the public domain, available for anyone, including your competitors, to use freely.
Okay, that's bad.
And, as we just talked about, a disorganized or, worse, a non-existent IP portfolio directly undermines those crucial funding rounds. Because investors doing their due diligence, they look for this stuff. If they don't see the defensibility documented, they get nervous. Yeah. Very nervous.
Because the value they thought they created through all their hard work and innovation is just lost, or at least made incredibly vulnerable because they didn't file the paperwork on time.
Precisely. It's value left on the table. Or worse, it's value that a competitor can just pick up and run with legally. Beyond just timing issues, there are other systemic pitfalls. Often there's a fundamental lack of awareness at the executive level about strategic IP.
Meaning IP isn't integrated into the core business strategy from the very beginning. It's treated reactively, like putting out fires, instead of proactively, like building foundations.
Okay.
Another major hurdle, and this one trips up a lot of startups, is unclear ownership. In that fast-paced, early-stage environment, formal agreements often get overlooked in the rush.
Like what kind of agreements?
Things like formal IP assignment agreements from employees or contractors, or really detailed co-founder IP agreements that specify who owns what was created before and during the company's formation.
Right. Those early days can be messy.
Very messy. And the sources often reference the famous Snapchat situation. Informal ideas apparently shared between founders at a party reportedly led to a massive, very costly legal battle later on over ownership of the core technology.
Ouch. I can see why that kind of ambiguity would scare off investors during due diligence.
Absolutely terrifies them because it introduces huge legal risk down the line. They're not just investing in the cool tech. They're investing in the clear, undisputed legal right to own and use that tech exclusively. Any cloud on the title is a major red flag.
Makes sense. What other challenges?
Another huge one is simply resource constraints. Startups are usually bootstrapped or running on very limited seed funding. Hiring a full-time, really experienced IP executive, someone with that necessary strategic depth, is often just prohibitively expensive.
We're talking big C-suite salaries.
Exactly. Significant salary, benefits, the whole package. And just relying solely on external law firms for everything IP related is also incredibly costly, especially for complex ongoing tasks like patent prosecution, the back and forth with patent offices, or managing a growing portfolio across multiple countries.
Right, those billable hours add up fast.
They do. And startups often lack the in-house expertise even to effectively budget for these costs, or to figure out the most cost-effective IP strategies. For instance, knowing when it's smarter to pursue a patent versus keeping a specific process as a closely guarded trade secret.
So they know they probably need IP, but the traditional ways of getting expert help are just too expensive or too complex for their limited resources.
That's a big part of it, yes. Which often perpetuates that reactive approach we mentioned. Instead of proactively identifying and mitigating IP risks before they become problems, startups often only address IP when a crisis hits.
Like when?
Like discovering a competitor is suddenly using technology that looks suspiciously like theirs, or receiving a formal office action from a patent examiner challenging their application, or worse, getting a cease and desist letter.
Okay.
This reactive stance dramatically increases the risk of inadvertently infringing on other companies' patents, too. Discovering way too late that your core product features actually infringe on someone else's existing patent. Well, that can lead to cripplingly expensive litigation.
Or being forced to stop selling your main product.
Exactly. Injunctions. Or needing costly and time-consuming redesigns. Any of those can be catastrophic for a cash-strapped startup. It really is like not bothering with a structural inspection on your house until after the roof is already caved in.
A very expensive fix indeed at that point.
Extremely. And the complexity just multiplies exponentially for startups that have global ambitions. Navigating the diverse, often conflicting IP laws of different countries, the US, Europe, India, China, coordinating filings, managing a growing global portfolio.
Okay.
It's a truly daunting task. It requires specialized knowledge and careful coordination.
And just figuring out what type of IP fits best must be tricky too.
Absolutely. Founders might misunderstand which protection is appropriate. Maybe they try to patent an AI algorithm that, because it evolves so fast and is hard to reverse engineer, might actually be better protected as a trade secret versus, say, a novel biotech process, which is a classic candidate for patent protection.
Right, different tools for different jobs.
Precisely. And there are common misconceptions, too, like believing you can patent a mere idea that hasn't been fully fleshed out, or in patent terms, reduced to practice.
And in the software world specifically, you mentioned open source. That adds another layer.
A huge layer. Absolutely critical point. The risks that come with using open source software libraries without fully understanding their specific licenses, well, it can lead to accidental infringement or license violations that expose the entire company to significant liability, sometimes requiring them to open source their own proprietary code.
Oof. That could be disastrous.
It could. And related to all this is the critical but often overlooked need for freedom to operate analyses.
Or FTO.
FTO, yeah, freedom to operate. Basically, it involves searching existing patents before you launch your product or service to make sure you aren't infringing on someone else's existing rights. Skipping this FTO step is just a massive gamble, rolling the dice with your whole company.
So you've got brilliant ideas, extremely limited resources, a breakneck pace of development, plus this incredibly complex, expensive, and risky global IP landscape. Really does sound like a perfect storm of challenges for startups.
It truly is, and this detailed picture of the problems, the pitfalls that startups face, is precisely why the sources we looked at emphasize this growing need for a specialized role, someone to provide dedicated strategic IP leadership.
Which brings us neatly to the solution proposed in these sources, the Chief Intellectual Property Officer role. Let's define that properly.
Right.
What exactly is a CIPO?
Okay, so a Chief Intellectual Property Officer, or CIPO, is really designed as an executive-level role. You should think of them as being part of the C-suite, sitting right alongside the NEO, the CTO, the CFO.
Okay, so high level.
Very high level. Their fundamental responsibility is to provide strategic oversight and also expert hands-on management of all aspects of intellectual property for the company.
Strategic oversight and expert management. Okay, that sounds like a blend of big picture planning and practical, get-it-done execution.
It is. And what's really crucial here, what the sources emphasize, is that it's explicitly defined as an executive function. Their role isn't just about, shuffling patent filings around.
Right, not just administrative.
Not at all. It's about ensuring the company's IP assets, all of them, are identified, protected, and importantly, leveraged in a way that directly supports and actually drives the overall business strategy and goals.
Okay, so how does that make a CIPO different from, say, the patent attorneys startups might hire, or even the in-house IP counsel that a bigger, more established company might have on staff?
Yeah, that's a really important distinction to make clear, and the sources definitely spend time clarifying this. Patent attorneys and IP lawyers are, of course, indispensable legal experts, no question.
Sure.
They focus on the legal specifics,
Yeah.
drafting patent applications, responding to patent office actions, that whole process called patent prosecution, advising on tricky legal interpretations of IP law, managing trademark applications, litigation, and so on. They're typically engaged for specific legal tasks or projects. You could think of them as the highly skilled craftspeople who build the specific legal assets, like a patent, or navigate very specific legal hurdles.
Got it. They handle the detailed technical legal work.
Precisely. A CIPO, on the other hand, needs a much broader perspective. While they often do have a strong legal background, their experience typically spans all the different types of IP patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secrets, maybe even things like domain names or rights of publicity, depending on the specific business.
Okay, a wider view.
A wider view, and critically, their core function is strategic. It's about aligning the IP strategy directly with the overall business strategy. They don't replace the need for external counsel. Instead, they manage and leverage those external lawyers effectively. They make sure the legal work being done actually aligns with the company's commercial goals.
So they're less focused on, say, dotting the I's and crossing the T's on one specific patent application, and much more focused on how that patent, or maybe that group of patents, or that crucial trade secret, fits into the company's entire competitive landscape and its overall growth plan.
Exactly that. You've nailed it. They need to be fluent in both the language of IP law and the language of the C-suite. And strategy, finance, product roadmaps, market dynamics, competitive pressures.
Bridging the gap.
Yes. They take the often complex legal advice from outside counsel and translate it into actionable business decisions for the rest of the executive team. They ensure the legal work isn't happening in some isolated silo, but is fully integrated into the company's technology development path and its commercialization strategy.
How does that differ from regular in-house IP staff? Some bigger companies have those.
Right. Standard in-house IP staff might handle more of the day-to-day filings, portfolio maintenance, maybe preliminary searches. A CIPO, however, has that executive visibility, the authority, and the strategic input to influence the entire organization's direction regarding innovation.
Okay. There's a simple analogy used in the sources. A patent attorney is like a specialist engineer solving specific technical legal problems. The CIPO is more like the architect who designs the entire building the IP portfolio and ensures all the different specialists' work fits together coherently to serve the overall vision and purpose of the business.
I like that analogy, architect versus specialist engineer.
Yeah, it captures that strategic overview aspect. And, this raises a really important question. How does having this executive level architect of IP actually translate into concrete, tangible strategic value for a lean startup?
That's the core question, isn't it? Beyond just getting patents filed correctly, how does having a CIPO actually help a startup grow, compete, and ultimately succeed?
It fundamentally elevates IP. It moves it from being perceived as just a cost center or maybe a reactive legal necessity into being seen and managed as a proactive strategic asset that actively drives the business forward.
Okay, how? What are the mechanisms? Well, one of the primary ways is through strategic alignment. The CIPO works really closely, shoulder to shoulder, with the CEO, the CTO, and the product development teams. They ensure that the innovations being pursued by R&D and the specific market opportunities the company is targeting are directly and intelligently protected through the right kinds of IP. They effectively bridge that potential gap you sometimes see between the CTO, who's focused on building cool, cutting-edge tech, and maybe the COO or head of product, who's focused on getting viable products to market. The CIPO makes sure the IP strategy supports both.
Preventing those mismatches, like patenting something you don't end up using or building something you can't legally sell.
Precisely, preventing those costly disconnects. This naturally leads to much better focus and prioritization. Startups, as we know, always have limited resources: time, money, people. A CIPO helps the executive team make really informed, tough decisions about which innovations are truly strategic and valuable enough to warrant the significant investment required for protection, especially global protection. They can conduct internal IP audits, map the company's innovative activities against its stated business objectives, and make sure that limited budget for patent filings, trademark registrations, etc. is allocated wisely to the most core, most defensible aspects of the technology or brand.
That focused investment sounds absolutely essential when every single dollar counts.
It absolutely is. Another major area of impact is proactive risk management and that freedom to operate, FTO piece we talked about.
Right, avoiding stepping on toes.
Exactly. The CIPO oversees those critical due diligence activities that many startups unfortunately neglect. Things like conducting FTO searches early in the product development cycle, not just before launch, and doing ongoing patent landscaping to really understand the competitive environment and potential infringement risks out there.
So you know what patents your competitors have.
Yes, and what patents might block your own plans. This drastically reduces the risk of inadvertently building and launching a product that infringes someone else's patent. It helps avoid those potentially devastating lawsuits or those forced, expensive redesigns we discussed earlier.
Okay.
They also establish clear internal policies for managing third-party IP, like proper procedures for vetting open source libraries before engineers incorporate them into the code. And they provide ongoing guidance on how to structure development activities, marketing claims, even partnerships to minimize potential legal risks down the road.
Basically preventing those really expensive headaches before they even start to form.
Exactly. A good CIPO is fundamentally about proactive risk mitigation, not just reacting to threats. They also provide essential cross-functional leadership. This is key.
How so?
They act as the central hub, the main point of contact and expertise for IP across the entire organization. This involves working closely with the R&D team, for example, to ensure that potential inventions are properly documented, maybe through formal invention disclosure forms or IDFs,
Right.
and ensuring the team understands the crucial differences between what might be patentable versus what information is perhaps best kept as a closely guarded trade secret. They train employees on maintaining confidentiality. They work hand in glove with HR to ensure all employees, contractors, even the co-founders, have signed appropriate invention assignment agreements and robust non-disclosure agreements, NDAs.
Formalizing ownership, preventing those Snapchat-type situations again.
Precisely. Nipping potential disputes in the bud. They also collaborate with the finance and legal teams to help understand and articulate the monetary value of the company's IP portfolio. This is crucial for financial reporting, for making compelling fundraising pitches, and certainly for M&A negotiations.
Right, putting a number on the intangible.
Often, they're the ones responsible for compiling that very detailed IP section that's always required in investor due diligence data rooms.
So they really need to speak the language of tech, law, HR, and finance, basically ensuring everyone across the company is on the same page when it comes to IP.
That's a great way to put it. They bridge those internal silos effectively. Furthermore, a truly strategic CIPO focuses not just on protecting IP, but actively on value creation and monetization.
Going beyond defense.
Exactly, going on offense in a way. They actively look for opportunities to leverage the IP portfolio beyond just stopping competitors. This might involve preparing certain IP assets for licensing out to other companies in different fields, or exploring technology transfer opportunities, or maybe negotiating cross-licensing agreements where you trade access to your patents for access to technology you need from another company.
Okay.
They can support the legal team in drafting the complex term sheets and contracts for these deals and help structure things like cross-border royalty agreements. And the evidence consistently shows that companies that develop and execute a well-documented strategic approach to managing their patent portfolio, for instance, tend to achieve substantially increased shareholder value over time.
So potentially turning IP from just a cost center into an actual revenue stream, or at least a really valuable asset in strategic deals.
Precisely. And then there's something perhaps less tangible, but equally important: the powerful investor and market signal that having a CIPO sends.
What do you mean?
When sophisticated investors, VCs, private equity, potential corporate acquirers see that a startup actually has a dedicated executive-level position focused specifically on IP strategy and management, it communicates a certain level of maturity.
Oh.
It signals strategic thinking, and it shows a clear understanding of where the company's most valuable assets truly lie. It tells them that IP risks are being actively identified and managed, and that the company is being built on defensible, proprietary ground.
It boosts confidence, essentially.
Absolutely. It boosts confidence during fundraising due diligence, and it significantly increases the company's attractiveness and potential valuation during M&A negotiations. Think back to those Google, Motorola, and Apple OffenTech examples. Acquirers explicitly pay a premium for well-protected, strategically important IP. Having a CIPO signals you have that.
So it's like a stamp of credibility, signaling that the intangible assets are being taken seriously right at the very top level of the company.
It absolutely is. And finally, maybe underpinning all of this, a CIPO helps foster an IP-aware culture throughout the entire organization.
Culture? How does that work?
Well, they ensure that best practices for handling confidential information are understood and followed by everyone. This minimizes the risk of accidental public disclosures that could inadvertently kill potential patent rights or leak valuable trade secrets. They help employees understand their own rights and obligations regarding IP created during their employment, which can actually contribute to retaining key technical staff whose innovations are core to the business.
Makes sense. People want clarity.
Right. And they ensure that all employee inventions are properly assigned to the company through those agreements we mentioned, and that robust NDAs are consistently used with external parties like suppliers or development partners. It creates a baseline level of IP hygiene across the company.
Okay, that's a really comprehensive case for the strategic value a CIPO brings. But we started this whole section by talking about startup resource constraints. If this role is so high level, so strategic, and so valuable, How can a typical startup possibly afford to hire someone like this full-time?
And that is precisely where the fractional CIPO model becomes such an elegant and, frankly, practical solution, particularly for the startup ecosystem. As we discussed, hiring a full-time, highly experienced IP executive, someone with that necessary strategic depth and C-suite presence, is often just prohibitively expensive for early-stage or even many growth-stage startups.
Right. Hundreds of thousands a year, easily.
Easily, when you factor in salary, bonus benefits, equity, the fully loaded cost is significant.
Okay, so explain the fractional model again in this specific context. How does it work for a CIPO?
Think of it in exactly the same way you might see other key executive functions fulfilled fractionally in the startup world. It's becoming quite common. You see fractional CFOs managing financial strategy part-time, fractional CMOs overseeing marketing efforts, sometimes even fractional CTOs providing high-level technical leadership on a contract basis.
Right, I've seen those roles advertised.
So a fractional CIPO is simply an experienced intellectual property executive who provides that same high level of strategic guidance and management, but they do it on a part-time or on-demand basis. They typically work with multiple non-competing companies simultaneously.
Okay.
They aren't full-time employees of any single startup. Instead, they're engaged as expert consultants, perhaps paid per project, or maybe on a monthly retainer based on a set number of hours or days.
So it's basically getting access to that top-tier C-level expertise, but without the massive commitment and ongoing cost of a full-time executive hire.
Exactly, that's the core idea. And this model offers several really key benefits that align almost perfectly with a typical startup reality. The most obvious one, of course, is cost effectiveness.
Right. Pay for what you use.
Precisely. Startups gain access to senior, executive-level IP expertise and strategic guidance at a significantly lower cost, often a small fraction of the cost, compared to hiring a full-time CIPO. They pay only for the specific hours or the specific projects or the strategic input they actually need at that time, rather than carrying a continuous large salary regardless of the immediate IP workload. This makes accessing high-level IP strategy feasible even for startups operating on very limited budgets.
It really does sound tailor-made for their financial constraints.
It really is. And coupled very closely with that cost benefit is the incredible on-demand flexibility it offers.
I mean, you can scale it up or down.
Exactly. The fractional CIPO's engagement level can be easily scaled up or down depending on the startup's immediate needs and where they are in their life cycle. They can be heavily involved during critical periods, for instance, when a new core technology is being engineered and needs a robust protection strategy developed around it.
Or maybe before a big funding round.
Absolutely. When preparing for a major Series A or Series B fundraising round that's going to involve intense IP due diligence from investors, or maybe when negotiating a key strategic partnership, or exploring a potential M&A deal where IP is going to be a central piece of the negotiation.
Okay.
During those intense periods, the fractional CIPO might work several days a week. But then during quieter periods, their hours can be scaled right back, perhaps just to provide ongoing oversight and answer occasional strategic questions. This allows the startup to strategically deploy that high-level IP expertise precisely when and where it's going to have the most impact.
So they're really there when you need them most, but you're not paying for downtime.
Pretty much. Another major advantage, often overlooked, is immediate access to expertise and tools. Experienced fractional CIPOs don't just bring their knowledge, they come armed with their own established networks.
Networks.
Yeah, networks of trusted external legal counsel they've worked with before, often in multiple jurisdictions. They bring battle-tested processes for things like IP management, invention disclosure harvesting, portfolio reviews, and often they have existing access to specialized, expensive IP tools, things like professional patent search databases, portfolio management software, global contact lists for foreign filings.
So they bring a whole infrastructure with them.
Essentially, yes. They bring this entire toolkit and network, saving the startup immense time and resources that would otherwise be spent trying to build all these capabilities from scratch internally. They can really hit the ground running from day one.
That sounds incredibly valuable, bringing a whole IP toolkit and network, not just their individual knowledge.
Yeah, it is. They also offer a really valuable objective perspective. Because they're external experts, often working with a portfolio of different clients across various industries, they can provide unbiased guidance.
Less susceptible to internal politics or biases.
Exactly. They can impartially audit the startup's existing IP assets and internal practices and identify potential gaps, risks, or even overlooked opportunities that internal teams, who might be too close to the project, could miss. They bring best practices and lessons learned from diverse situations, helping the startup avoid common mistakes and apply proven strategies without having to constantly reinvent the wheel.
Fresh, experienced eyes looking at complex internal matters. That makes sense.
Exactly. And the model itself offers inherent scalability. This is important for growth. A startup could begin with a very low level of engagement, maybe just a few hours a month for high-level strategic counsel and review.
Okay.
Then, as the company grows, as it develops more IP, perhaps expands into new international markets or starts preparing for larger funding rounds or an IPO, the need for sophisticated IT management naturally increases.
Right. The fractional CIPO's hours and responsibilities can be easily scaled up accordingly to meet that growing need. Or eventually they can even assist the company in recruiting and smoothly transitioning to a full-time in-house IP executive when the business needs and the financial resources finally justify making that significant leap.
So it's a really flexible path. It allows you to get the right level of expertise at each stage, starting small and growing the support organically as the company itself grows.
That's right. It provides that essential IP governance and strategic thinking right from the outset, potentially preventing costly early mistakes, and then it can evolve seamlessly with the company's journey. And importantly, even when working in a fractional capacity, they still fulfill that critical bridge role we talked about earlier.
Remind me.
Managing the external legal counsel efficiently, making sure the legal spend is strategic, overseeing the IP budget, ensuring consistency in IP practices across different departments like R&D and marketing, educating the internal teams on IP basics, and crucially, representing the company's IP interests credibly in high-stakes negotiations with investors, partners, or acquirers. They provide that missing executive oversight for this absolutely crucial value-driving area.
That makes perfect sense for the realities, the pressures, the constraints of a typical startup. Now, you mentioned earlier, and the sources highlight this, that this fractional CIPO model is particularly well suited for the Indian startup ecosystem. Why India specifically? What unique factors there make this role so relevant right now?
Yeah, that's a really key takeaway from the sources we reviewed. India's startup ecosystem, as you know, is incredibly dynamic. It's just been expanding at a phenomenal rate.
Absolutely explosive growth.
Right. We've seen this massive growth leading to, I think the number is over 100 unicorns now, and a really vibrant deep tech sector emerging, all strongly supported by government initiatives people have heard of, like Startup India, Digital India, Make in India. According to recent data from the DPIIT, that's the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, there are now over 100,000 officially recognized startups in India.
Over 100,000 startups. That's a massive pool of innovation happening.
It really is. However, and this is the interesting part, when you look at the actual data on intellectual property filings coming from these Indian startups, things like patents, trademarks, industrial designs, the numbers remain disproportionately low compared to the sheer volume of innovation that seems to be happening on the ground.
So tons of innovation, tons of startups, but not proportionally reflected in IP filings. Why is that?
Well, the sources highlight a significant contributing factor. Many Indian startups, perhaps historically or due to resource focus, don't yet approach IP in a truly strategic manner at the executive level. And a large part of that is attributed to a widespread lack of senior internal IP leadership within these growing companies.
Okay, so there's this huge wave of innovation and growth, but the internal capacity, the strategic thinking about IP within the startups themselves is maybe lagging a bit behind the pace of development.
Exactly. That seems to be the assessment. This often leads to a heavy reliance on external patent agents and law firms for IP matters. And while these external firms are absolutely vital for the legal execution, the drafting, the filing, the prosecution, without that internal strategic oversight, that C-level direction from someone like a CIPO, it often results in IP filings that aren't perfectly aligned with the company's core business strategy long-term, or missed opportunities for actually monetizing the IP they do have, or increased vulnerability during investor due diligence or potential M&A talks, and real difficulty in building and managing the kind of robust global IP portfolios that are needed for serious international expansion.
Right.
The fractional CIPO model offers a potentially very affordable and highly effective way for these Indian startups to bridge that critical gap, to get that strategic IP leadership embedded within the company.
So essentially, they get that much-needed strategic director inside the company, even if it's only part-time, who can then guide the overall strategy and make sure the money spent on external legal firms is actually effective and truly aligned with where the business is trying to go.
Precisely. It brings that crucial IP decision-making right into the executive team's discussions. And crucially, just like startups everywhere else, Indian startups typically operate with significant capital constraints and very lean teams, especially in those early and growth stages.
True. Bootstrapped or tight seed Series A funding.
Exactly. So the cost of hiring a full-time senior IP executive, especially one with the requisite experience, including global IP exposure, well, it's often simply too high for their budgets to bear. The fractional model provides access to that critical senior expertise at, a fraction of the cost. It fits those resource realities perfectly.
It sounds like a really pragmatic financial fit for that specific ecosystem's constraints.
It is. Furthermore, a high percentage of the more ambitious Indian tech startups today have their sights set firmly on global markets: North America, Europe, Southeast Asia, the Middle East.
Makes sense. Huge market opportunities there.
Absolutely. But navigating the complex, often very varied and certainly costly processes of seeking and maintaining IP protection across multiple international jurisdictions, coordinating filings effectively in India, then perhaps using the international PCT system, then entering national phases in the USPTO in the US, the EPO in Europe, maybe China, Japan, others. It's incredibly complex.
Sounds like a logistical nightmare without expert help.
It can be. It's resource intensive and requires dedicated, experienced guidance to do well and cost effectively. A fractional CIPO can effectively manage these global complexities, ensuring the IP strategy directly supports those international expansion goals from the start.
Helping them actually protect their innovations efficiently on a global scale.
Yes, efficiently and strategically. It also helps Indian startups shift away from that common reactive approach to IP management we talked about. A fractional CIPO can implement proactive measures like those FTO searches, like competitor patent landscape analyses right from the beginning, which is absolutely vital for startups running on limited cash reserves, helping them avoid those costly, potentially business-ending infringement lawsuits down the line.
Yeah. Proactive steps are almost always cheaper than reactive lawsuits.
Always. Prevention is definitely better and cheaper than the cure, especially when the cure involves multi-year, multi-million-dollar litigation. And thinking about funding again, for Indian startups seeking investment, having a strong, well-managed IP portfolio, ideally guided by a CIPO, even fractional, significantly enhances their valuation prospects and demonstrably improves their chances of securing that crucial funding.
That 59% VC funding boost statistic applies just as much in India.
Absolutely. A fractional CIPO can help conduct the necessary IP audits before fundraising, prepare those convincing IP sections for investor decks, and help the founders confidently articulate the true value of their IP as a strategic moat, a key differentiator. This really boosts investor confidence and definitely increases the company's attractiveness during any M&A discussions.
So it's a clear signal to investors and potential acquirers that this company understands its core value and knows how to protect it, not just locally, but on the global stage.
Exactly. It signals maturity, foresight, and strategic thinking qualities that sophisticated investors and strategic acquirers actively look for. Finally, a fractional CIPO helps build that IP-aware culture internally and, crucially, helps ensure compliance with relevant Indian laws.
Ah, the local compliance aspect.
Yes, things like the Indian Patents Act of 1970, the Trademarks Act, the Designs Act, Copyright Act. They can help establish formal invention disclosure processes, IDFs, that work well and comply with local requirements. They can train the R&D team specifically on identifying patentable inventions versus managing trade secrets within the Indian legal framework. And they ensure proper invention assignment agreements are in place with employees and founders according to Indian contract law.
Got it.
They serve as that crucial liaison, again, between the engineering teams, the India-based legal counsel, and the executive suite, managing the outside counsel effectively, translating the legal advice into actionable steps, all within the specific Indian business and regulatory context.
So it really sounds like the fractional CIPO isn't just some generic global trend. It's a particularly powerful and well-fitting solution for the specific combination of challenges and opportunities we see within India's rapidly growing, globally ambitious startup ecosystem.
That's precisely the conclusion the sources point towards. It addresses a critical need for affordable, flexible, strategic IP leadership in a way that perfectly matches the resource realities and the global ambitions of so many innovative Indian startups today.
Okay, let's try and make this even more concrete. Could you illustrate this with a few potential scenarios? Drawing from the types of challenges and the kinds of tech companies common in India, as suggested by the sources, how would a fractional CIPO practically help, say, a few different kinds of Indian tech startups?
Yeah, absolutely. These scenarios really help bring the role to life. Let's imagine, say, a sauce AI startup based in Pune. They've developed a really novel machine learning algorithm for a specific industry application. A fractional CIPO coming in would first help them figure out, okay, which parts of this algorithm and its application are best protected as closely guarded trade secrets, and which specific aspects might be genuinely novel and non-obvious enough to be potentially patentable.
Making that crucial patent versus trade secret decision early?
Exactly. Then they would coordinate the drafting and filing of core patent families covering those novel aspects. Maybe they'd file first in India to establish a priority date, and then strategically use the international PCT system to preserve rights for later national filings in key target markets, perhaps the US and Europe.
Okay, global strategy.
Right. They'd also ensure robust NDAs are in place with all employees and any development partners. They'd review the software licensing terms the company uses with its customers to make sure the underlying IP is properly protected. And importantly, they could advise the startup on using patent databases and market intelligence tools to identify potentially infringing competitors, maybe based on competitors' own published patent applications or their product features. This gives the startup vital competitive intelligence.
Wow, okay. So they're handling the type of protection, the global filing strategy, the licensing terms, and keeping an eye on competitors. That's quite comprehensive.
It is. Or let's consider a health tech startup, maybe in Hyderabad. They're developing a new portable diagnostic device that combines some novel hardware sensors with sophisticated embedded software.
Common scenario in health tech.
Very common. Their fractional CIPO would likely advise them on pursuing both utility patents for the core functionality of the hardware and the diagnostic method, and potentially design patents, or design registrations as they're called in some places, for the device's unique appearance or form factor, which can be valuable too.
Protecting function and form.
Exactly. They would coordinate the dual filing strategy, perhaps starting with filings in India, again using the PCT system for international coverage, with subsequent national filings targeted potentially in Europe and the US, depending on where the major healthcare markets are for this device. For the complex manufacturing process, they might advise on implementing really robust trade secret protocols with the contract manufacturer.
Protecting the how it's made.
Right. And then, crucially, when this startup gets ready to raise its Series B funding round, the fractional CIPO would be absolutely instrumental in preparing that vital IP valuation section of the investor deck. They'd help articulate the value proposition of the hardware patents, the design patents, the software copyrights, and those manufacturing trade secrets to potential investors, justifying the company's valuation.
Helping actually quantify that intangible value for those critical investment discussions. Makes sense.
Right. One more. Let's think about a hardware robotics startup, maybe developing advanced drones for industrial inspection or agriculture.
Okay, another hot area.
Definitely. A fractional CIPO engaged early would immediately arrange for a comprehensive patent search, a freedom to operate search covering their proposed drone design, the control systems, any unique sensor payloads very early in the development process.
Before they commit too much R&D spend.
Exactly. If that search reveals that a competitor already holds a strong, relevant patent that their intended design might infringe upon, the CIPO can then advise the engineering team early on options. Maybe they can design around that competitor's patent. Or perhaps they need to explore the possibility of negotiating a license from the patent holder before they launch the product.
Preventing that potentially crippling infringement lawsuit down the line by tackling it proactively.
That's the goal. Avoid the disaster scenario. They would also, of course, help secure the startup's own relevant IP, maybe utility patents on novel flight control algorithms, design patents for the drone's unique physical appearance, and perhaps trademarks for the product's brand name.
Building their own moat.
Yes. And then when it comes time for a potential exit, say, a strategic acquisition by a large aerospace company or maybe a defense contractor interested in their drone technology, the CIPO's prior work ensures the IP portfolio is clean, well-documented, strategically aligned, and presented as a core, valuable asset during the intense due diligence process, hopefully maximizing the acquisition price.
Catching those potential legal landmines early, building their own IP assets, and making the company much more attractive for a strategic acquisition.
Got it. Exactly. You see, in all these different scenarios, the common thread is that the fractional CIPO provides that essential strategic guidance at critical junctures. They tailor the IP approach specifically to the technology, the business model, and the market context, and they help prevent those incredibly costly mistakes or missed opportunities that can derail a promising startup. They don't necessarily need to be physically present 40 hours a week. It's often that periodic, high-impact strategic input at the executive level that makes the real difference.
These examples really do underscore the practical, tangible value. Okay, so given this clear need, which seems particularly pronounced in India, how is the ecosystem actually developing to support the rise of this fractional CIPO model there? Is the talent pool ready? Are the structures in place?
That's a really important question about the future growth and scaling of this model. The sources suggest that while India certainly has a significant and rapidly growing pool of skilled IP professional patent agents, trademark attorneys, IP lawyers focused on litigation, many are primarily trained and experienced in the technical and legal execution side. You know, the drafting, filing, prosecution, enforcement.
Right, the specialist engineer role from your analogy.
Exactly. There's a specific identified need to develop more C-level strategic IP leaders, people who can effectively bridge that gap between the deep legal and technical expertise and the overarching business strategy and commercial goals, operating comfortably at an executive level.
Okay, so a need for more architects. How do you cultivate those?
Well, the sources highlight several kinds of initiatives that are likely needed to really build out this ecosystem effectively.
What sort of initiatives are being discussed?
Things like developing specific IP leadership fellowships or maybe executive training programs. These would be explicitly designed to equip experienced senior IP professionals with the broader business acumen, the financial literacy, the strategic thinking skills required for these C-suite advisory roles.
Okay, targeted training.
Yes. There's also a recognized need for better platforms, perhaps dedicated online marketplaces or specialized consulting networks that could act as efficient fractional IP consulting platforms. Their function would be to connect these experienced IP executives directly with the startups that need their services, specifically on a flexible, fractional basis, making the connection easier.
Matchmaking, essentially.
Kind of, yes. The increased availability and adoption of sophisticated legal tech tools is also seen as crucial. These tools can support efficient remote IP management, streamline processes like invention disclosures or portfolio tracking and reporting, and generally increase the efficiency and reduce the cost of providing fractional IP services. Technology enablement.
So training the right kind of strategic people, building the infrastructure to connect them easily with startups, and leveraging technology to make it all more efficient.
Exactly. And alongside those structural pieces, there's a perceived need for broader awareness campaigns across the entire Indian startup landscape.
Awareness about what specifically?
Focused on educating founders, but also investors, mentors, incubator managers, the whole ecosystem about the strategic importance of integrating IP into the core business model right from day one. Moving the conversation beyond just viewing IP a necessary legal expense or a compliance checkbox towards understanding it as a fundamental driver of value and growth.
So less about just telling founders you need to file patents, and more about demonstrating how strategic IP management actually builds a stronger, more valuable, more defensible business in the long run.
Precisely. Shifting the mindset towards proactive strategy. And finally, the sources also point towards the potential role of policy support.
Government involvement.
Potentially. While existing schemes like the Startup India Intellectual Property Protection or SIPP scheme already provide helpful rebates on official filing fees for startups, there's discussion around the potential to perhaps expand such programs, maybe to explore co-funding access to fractional CIPO advisory services for officially registered startups, at least in the early stages.
Interesting. So government help to actually pay for some of this strategic advice, not just the filing fees.
It's an idea being floated. This kind of targeted support could significantly incentivize more early-stage companies to adopt this strategic IP management approach early on, providing them access to crucial expertise they might otherwise delay seeking or forego entirely due to cost concerns.
That kind of government support could really act as a catalyst for wider adoption, especially among the most resource-constrained startups.
It certainly could. Building all these pieces of the ecosystem, consciously developing the strategic talent, creating the connection platforms, fully leveraging technology, significantly increasing awareness about strategic value, and potentially providing smart supportive policy. All of these will be key to ensuring that India's incredibly innovative and numerous startups can effectively harness the full power of their intellectual property to compete and achieve sustainable success on the global stage.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive, really fascinating stuff. We started by highlighting the just immense and still growing value of intangible assets globally. That $61.9 trillion figure is still echoing. We explored the specific, often quite painful challenges that startups commonly face in trying to manage their IP effectively amidst all the other pressures. And then we really zeroed in on this chief intellectual property officer role, particularly the flexible and pragmatic fractional model, as a potentially powerful strategic solution, one that seems perfectly suited for the unique startup environment, with, as we discussed, a special relevance and potential impact for the dynamic Indian ecosystem.
Yeah, and just to summarize those key takeaways again, IP is absolutely no longer just a legal checkbox. It is fundamentally a core strategic asset. It's directly driving startup valuation, it's critical for attracting funding, and it's essential for ensuring long-term competitiveness in innovation-driven markets. However, many startups, particularly early-stage ones, struggle significantly with IP due to a common lack of awareness, constrained resources, and crucially, a lack of dedicated internal leadership focused on IP strategy. This leads to those common pitfalls: missed opportunities, lost value, significant legal risks. The fractional CIPO model emerges as a really compelling solution. It's cost-effective, it's flexible, it allows startups to access that vital senior IP expertise and strategic guidance precisely when needed. It bridges that critical gap, provides the necessary executive oversight, and as we saw, seems particularly valuable for helping startups navigate the unique opportunities and complexities found within India's thriving innovation landscape today.
Absolutely. So here's maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to consider as we wrap up. In this world where intangible assets ideas, inventions, brands, data, software are increasingly becoming the primary drivers of economic value, how are you approaching the identification, the protection, and perhaps most importantly, the strategic management of the unique innovations that might be around you, whether it's in your own work, maybe in the companies you invest in, or even just observing the businesses you interact with every day. Are you seeing IP treated as just a reactive legal task, maybe a cost to be minimized? Or are you seeing it treated as a proactive strategic asset, something that's being actively built, nurtured, and leveraged for sustainable growth and competitive advantage?
Yeah, recognizing the fundamental importance of strategic IP management and understanding these evolving roles like the CIPO, both full-time and fractional, is becoming essential for anyone who's navigating or participating in the modern innovation economy. It's very often a key factor in determining which new ventures will ultimately thrive and build lasting, defensible value in the marketplace.